I'm Mohammad Junaid. I'm the student of this, as I would say, one of the greatest institutes to learn in this country and beyond. I studied here in 2003 and 5. So many congratulations to the conference organizers, to the ICA, Department of Mass Communication, Professor Dr. Salim Abbas, Dr. Firas Jabi, and obviously our wonderful son of soil, Dr. Jonathan Eddleton, who was just here with us. By the way, a lot of people do not know that he was born in Murray in Pakistan, while his parents were serving in Pakistan. So this plenary session is the Activism and Academia, bridging the gap in the climate research and public engagement. So the first word is very, very interesting. The activism in academia or the activism and academia. I think our journalism is very much full of activism. Right now, the era we are going through, and this conference could not be more perfect, Dr. Naushir, while you were here, because you were just in Delhi, and now you're in Lahore, two of the cities who were the worst in last 3 months on the climate index because of the poor air quality. It was a competition going on between Delhi and Lahore. One day Delhi was up and one day Lahore was up. This was going on. So we have our guest here, Dr. Naushir. Some of you have already heard him, Professor of Behavioral Sciences and Communication, Northwestern University, United States. We have Dr. Waqas Ijaz, Research Fellow with the Oxford Climate Journalism Network UK. He did set the fire alarm while he was giving the very, very hot data just a while ago. And we have Farhanaz Zahidi Mozam here from Karachi, a wonderful journalist, been working with the Third Pole, and she's one of the editor for Pakistan. We have one esteemed faculty member from FC College, Dr. Sylvia M. Machado. She is the faculty member in the Environmental Sciences in FC College University. And then we have someone many of us have grown up watching, getting old from young, but still very, very graceful and good looking, and fighting in the courts for the environment and whatnot. Sure, a lot of people who were not even born, or who even after born, they had zero idea about what this guy is doing and why the environmental challenges are so important for us. I think today they know. 10 years ago, they did not know, and this guy was still fighting for us. Ahmed Rafe Alam, environmental lawyer and activist, is with us. Very, very good to see you, sir. This is the first time I'm meeting Rafe Saab, but it does not feel like that I'm meeting him for the first time, because we've seen him all our life doing the best and amazing things. So we'll start this discussion. Absolutely. We can seriously say that no one has really taken whatever he has been telling us seriously. And that's one of the biggest problems. That's why probably we are here. That's why we are here at this conference, because this is now taking over. You know, pani sar se guzar raha hai, या गुजर चुका है, तब सबको ख्याल आ रहा है. बट शुक्र है कि कोई लोग ऐसे हैं जिनको ख्याल आ रहा है. Dr. Firasat, Dr. Salim Abbas, this conference seems so perfect. The only thing missing right now probably, or only thing left to be added, is Greta Thunberg. Because you've gathered everyone who's very, very vital for the environment and for the climate, and whatever is this country going through, especially this city where we're sitting, one of the most beautiful cities in this region. And it's been unfortunate last 2 months that the heavy influx in the newspapers and television was all about the air quality of Lahore. So we'll start with Dr. Naushir. We heard him. He brought up some very, very interesting details, and obviously he's one of the amazing person. And we lack the idea of communication because people do not take these things seriously. We'll start with you, Dr. Naushir. Let's say, like, what is the biggest challenge right now when we want to talk about it, and when we want people to be convinced and understand that this is a real problem? This can sink the world. This can be a biggest danger to the survival of the humanity. And then, especially while we have a new incoming president in the United States who does not believe in climate change, he does not believe in global warming. He's the one who unfortunately took the United States out of the Paris Agreement in 2020. Later on, the US came back to follow that agreement. What is the biggest challenge right now, while we're just probably 1.5 months away from Donald Trump becoming the US president.
First of all, thanks again for hosting this panel. I feel I'm in the midst of major celebrities in Pakistan. My claim to fame is that I know all of you now, and I'm really thrilled to be here. Your question, in terms of what is the biggest challenge that is faced in terms of persuading people or influencing people, I think it comes down to first a flawed assumption that I have seen propagated by a lot of folks in the journalism practitioner community in particular, and was in fact the topic of a big National Academies of Science colloquium that I was fortunate to participate in back in the United States before COVID. The assumption is that if only we could tell people what the facts are, then everything is going to be okay. So the assumption is that as long as we are able to communicate what are the issues associated with climate change, and if we are effective at communicating all the data, then all the problems will get solved. It turns out that that's an incredibly naive view of how humans react and change their attitudes and behaviors. How many of us have heard someone say, I don't care what the facts are, I'm entitled to my beliefs? And that is at the heart of why, when we think about social influence in this context, we think about two fields in particular, the field of communication and to some extent the field of social psychology, that focuses on what we mean by persuasion, what we mean by social influence. When I'm about to change an opinion on something, I rely on my social network. I don't always rely directly on the mass media. I know that the mass media is important, but theorists of mass communication going back to the 1960s talked about a two-step flow where we are not influenced directly by the media, but we are influenced by people who are influenced by the media. These are the so-called influencers. What I would say is that while the network, which is my area, is obviously very important in deciding who influences you, the field of psychology and persuasion and communication has focused on how we are influenced. And very often, you don't influence people only by providing them facts. Social psychologists say some people have a need to be right. These are people who are persuaded by the facts. But there are a lot of people who have a need to be liked, in which case they are more persuaded based upon the fact that somebody who they like says something or somebody gave them a favor. I can talk more about it later on. But that remains a challenge that we have to make sure that we meet people about their attitude change and behavior change where they are, and not assume that as long as we have the facts, everything else will take care of itself.
Interesting take. I think this challenge is going to grow probably if we don't fight the situation. Farana Zaidi Sahaba, thank you for being part of this panel. I think one of the things which was discussed in the opening session was like how people believe this or they don't believe this. If I'm giving a news about environment, I want people to immediately take an action. Like if we're running the news about how much smog is there, because there's like two sections. One is the whole climate situation going on and the environment. I think the general public probably can't play that much role in what's happening to the glaciers and what's happening to the ozone layer. So obviously they're more directly concerned and connected with the environment. Yes, I know some people who saw the news and there was a crucial challenge about smog and they told their family that we will not be using the cars, we will not be running the generator for next few days. This is sort of an immediate action. When we talk about stories being told, and I think as Dr. Vikas was saying that this has to go beyond news. Like you watch the news, you can't really say you know about what's happening to the environment. You can know about few incidents, but you don't figure out what's actually happening. Is it one of the biggest things when we write about climate, when we write about environment? And also in Pakistan, is this part of the discussion to include the marginalized communities which are directly affected by the climate, as whatever happened in Sindh in last floods in Pakistan?
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much for that, Junaid. So for starters, something that you had mentioned in your opening remarks, I hope that as media persons, we are not activists or we are not, we stay objective as much as we can. So we are relayers And I'll start by answering or commenting on something Dr. Vakar had said, that people who usually write about climate or report about climate in the media, they have studied mass communication. They have not studied the environment. Very honestly, we are not supposed to study the environment. We are just relayers of news, and that's our only claim to fame over here. Coming back to what Junaid was saying, the interesting thing about climate change and environment is it is so multi-pronged and it is so related to every other thing that is happening now that it's no wonder that it is the buzzword. The issue that happens in countries like Pakistan is that on one hand, people are either unaware, and if they are aware, they know that the emissions, very few of the emissions are coming from countries like Pakistan or the global south. So even if we do make a difference, well, maybe we can reduce the smog a little, but that's not what's happening. So at the international stage, how much are we able to show and highlight? And that's where, as media persons, we come in, that we show what are the impacts of it, a human-centric approach, and telling that this is actually affecting people on an everyday basis. This is what is happening on ground, like the floods. Women are being affected as marginalized communities, farmers are being affected, the crops are being affected, but maybe we don't sometimes look at things like why we have low birth babies, and maybe the heat is behind it. So at the end of it, a media person is a storyteller, and as storytellers, we have to tell honest stories about how this is affecting everyday lives. And that's how this will go on. Whether we want our message to go to the policymakers or we want awareness to be raised on the ground. So one of the things we have to take care of is not just in the English speaking, for the English speaking audience, but also in vernacular languages, talk about it at ground level, and let this go across how they can protect and guard themselves. But at the end of the day, the emissions are actually, Pakistan and such countries are not the major reason behind it, and we know that. And I think Rafi would be able to shed more light on that.
No, of course, Rafi sir, we know what you do is very difficult. You don't only just tell about the environment, you just go fight in the courts. And then most of us know what people say about that. Is that struggle getting more difficult over the years? And right now, where do we stand while we having this conference, while there is a whole smog crisis going on, while there is extreme heat, wildfires, in all the regions? And surprisingly, what Dr. Vikas mentioned, data was beautiful. It's so sad to see why people in Brazil, only 2% of them just thought that this is an issue, while Jair Bolsonaro did what to Amazon is unforgettable, unforgivable. So we're living in very, very dangerous times. Is it going to be more difficult for you to go to the courts and get the thing done?
Or to improve it's not what courts do. I don't know where in our public imagination we've come to, we read Shahid Kareem ne order pass kiya smog squads, and we're like, something is that's not what courts are supposed to do. We live in a strange country. Our courts are fixing the air. Our army is doing corporate farming. Maybe that's why we're in the situation that we're in. I was reflecting on this idea of communication. And because my job is just that, I mean, every day when I'm in front of a judge, it's the dark art of persuasion that I'm trying to employ to change his mind or to convince him. And there are various ways of doing it. You've got to know your audience. You've got to have good language. And it's very important to tell stories and not necessarily facts, because stories move people much differently. If you're in the job of trying to persuade people, you can't use these anodyne, secular, technocratic language to move someone's heart. That's not going to work. I mean, you could go on and on and on and read all the newspaper articles and research articles that tell you, so many gigatons of carbon has been emitted, and this is the impact of offsets. But that's all technical. You got to somehow give it context. And well, to quote my favorite author, Gore Vidal, himself quoting a philosopher, David Hume, the one thing that has allowed a very few number of people, and there have been very few, to convince a very large number of people to do things, and there were a very large number of people, is opinion, it's stories. So really communication is at the heart of this messaging. And what I feel now, having spoken a technocratic language for most of my career, and seen the effects of it outside. I mean, 10 saal se, I've been 20 years, I've been telling people what to do. If only they'd listened to me, we'd have clean air. But obviously my messaging was incorrect. I'm now increasingly of the opinion that we have to add a context and morality to this debate. Context and morality. Farhanaz was just talking about how Pakistan's a small fry in this entire climate disaster. Yeah, to give it context, let me put it this way. We have, as a civilization, overconsumed the resources of the earth, and this earth can no longer sustain the civilization that sits on it. In other words, it's as if a bomb went away about 300 meters away, and you've got that half a second between the flash and the impact. And that's where we're at. The bomb's exploded. We're just watching it in somewhat slow motion as our civilization, this one, will completely come to an end. That doesn't mean human beings are going to die. It means the way we live now cannot sustain itself. Things are going to have to drastically change. And the things that allow you or force you to drastically change is morality, right? I mean, there's no reason, for example, why so many people in the world won't eat pork other than a moral reason, right? Right. It's what speaks to your heart. You have got to give a morality. That we are facing a civilizational collapse. There are a handful of countries and a handful of companies that have made immense amounts of wealth for themselves, creating poverty elsewhere, full well in the knowledge of what's going on earth. It's called an ecocide. We should call it that. We should haul these people up and treat them like the criminals they are. You know? Instead, we give people who extract natural resources and abuse human labor, we give them this title of billionaire and think they're somehow God-gifted experts. No, they're not. They've created poverty. They've created inequity all over the place. They've ruined the environment. And look, again, you look at the facts. 2 years ago, when Pakistan was struck by floods, yes, the intensity of which, 50% of the intensity of which was caused by the 1 degree of global warming. So this was not a natural disaster. This was a man-made disaster that 30 million Pakistanis had to pay the price for. And it cost Pakistan somewhere in the region of $35 to $40 billion in infrastructure and other forms of losses, which is less money than Shell made in profits in 1 year. In 2022. Shell made $40 billion. Saudi Aramco made $161 billion. Put this into context, okay? Pakistan lost $30 billion of infrastructure while it's in an IMF loan. It becomes the poster child of something called the Loss and Damage Fund, which is then agreed on by the United Nations and the COP that yes, we need to have money going to poor countries so that they can put their people and economies back on their feet. What is it now? 700 million was originally pledged, and now what's the amount? It's still in the, it's piddling. So in COP28, when the Loss and Damage Fund was capitalized at about $700 million, again, put it into context. Notre Dame burnt to the ground in 2018-19. It's recently been reconstructed. The Parisians got more money. They got $1.1 billion in grants to put together Notre Dame.
Yeah,
then Pakistan got, or the Loss and Damage Fund got. The United States paid $17 million to the Loss and Damage Fund. It gave Ukraine and Israel $95 billion this year. That should enrage people. It should enrage you that there is money for war and they're willing to watch us die, the global south, the global majority die. And it's this moral compass you have to make this communication more effective.
Yeah, last COP conference was in Azerbaijan. Obviously, the pledge they wanted, the given pledge was probably less than half of it. But I think I hear your feelings, and it kind of resonates with when Greta says, like, how dare you? So I think we all want to stand up and say, how dare you? Because this is going on and on, unfortunately. Madam Sylvia, you have the access to the students, what we call like the future of this country, and obviously the largest population of our country too. As the election data showed, how much directly, effectively possible it is to convince this generation who is our future, to bring some change for what we are fighting today. I know in a lifelong example that I know some of my friends who only quit smoking because their daughters asked. Otherwise, no power in the world or beyond, or no surgeon could actually stop them. So, do they have the power? And you teach them that they can go on and bring the changes, through whatever access they have, through their families, and eventually what jobs they're going to do in this country or outside Pakistan. Is it viable? Is it possible for the scholars to do right now?
Um, I hope so. I hope so. Someone once told me that once we reach 35 years old, it's very difficult to make us do something that someone else is telling us. I think, and working in academia, we need to have an approach, and you're talking that how you're trying to reach the people and how we can change behaviors, because this is how what we are trying to do is to people to accept that there needs to be a change. And when we are trying to make people change, I think there are three aspects. First, we are sitting in our offices and working, and we come with words, buzzwords, emissions, CO2, methane. And I don't think anyone here wakes up in the morning and says, let me work in decarbonization. I don't think so. So the point, and relating the teaching and academia to find a solution for the problem is to work, to have solutions, people driven. And that's the gap that we have currently. This is an interdisciplinary problem. We have people here from different fields. And there's a big gap of communication in between the scientists that are in their offices using these big words. And then you go in the public and you ask them, you talk about climate change, and I'm sure everyone heard about climate change. Do they understand it? Probably not. If we are using these words, who will understand net zero emissions? They won't understand that. So simplifying the language, and then to make people do and to be able to reach where we want to reach, is to make it relatable. There's a greenhouse effect and so on. Why not a pollution blanket? Everyone understands. When you talk about, and people think that global warming, for example, it's the same thing as an ozone hole. They understand perfectly fine. It's a hole, it's ozone hole. They understand that. Global warming, because the language that we keep on using, it's so unreachable for the majority of the 8 billion in the world, that they won't relate with it. So that's the next step. It's first simplifying the language, and second is making it relevant for their daily lives. That how is it relevant for me to act on global warming? And the third one is making them care. How is this affecting me? For example, I have my son. I may not be considering to have solutions in my lifetime to be able to solve the problems that are going on, hopefully. But I'm thinking I have my child, and he will be affected in the future. So a lot of us, if we are asked, you're saying that your friends left, stopped smoking because of their daughters. So I would take action today, because I may not be able to see the complete solution, but I would take action if I'm able to relate it and to care for it, because it affects someone that I care, someone that I love. So I think that the solution for us to be able to reach to where we want to reach is actually bridging the gap in between the difficult words, the science that we are discussing, and then who can help us simplifying this and have role models in the society that everyone follows, talking in the way, not just the different languages, but in the simplified language, in their accent as well, so they will relate and they will follow because they care and it's relevant for them.
Very interesting. Dr. Vikas, shocking data on people's opinion in Brazil and somewhat very encouraging data on people's opinion in Pakistan, how much the percentage shown people know about climate crisis and the effects on the environmental challenges. What is the tool to go forward then? You talked about, other people talked about artificial intelligence, digital media access. I don't remember any last movie made in Hollywood in recent months, which was about environmental climate change and got blockbuster or earned like, hundreds of millions or $1 billion. Yes, if you make a movie about maybe TikTok videos, it's going to be, filling the cinemas. How we can change that? I mean, you are right that following the news does not actually involve you as a person to stop the climate change. But that is the only way for the general people to find out about it. Only then, after then, they can go to take certain other steps. How is this possible? What's the tool? What's the way forward then?
Well, that's a question that I neither am equipped to answer or nor I have the answer to. But I can try. First of all, there are a lot of movies. Look Up was one, which is basically just environmental movie. And made a lot of money.
Yeah,
won
they
the
don't get
Oscar.
that much famous or, crazy viewership or something.
If you look, Oppenheimer was also kind of environmental movie as well. So, but that's a bit of a movie buff in me, so that's why I had to sort of say that.
The Barbie movie.
Well, we have our, I won't divulge into that. But anyways, so the point that you raise, I mean, what we are trying to say, and I think, again, being last among the questions being asked, I can piggyback on a lot of the questions, the things that already mentioned. Rafi, for example, mentioned morality. If I may, before I answer, and I apologize to the audience, please find the answer something that I'm about to say because the answer is there. I may not be able to articulate it in a way. Rafi mentioned about the morality. Me and Dr. Najam is working on something that which Nashir brought up about, we have always have been so confident in our ability of seeing a very, very intelligent being. If we present an empirical evidence, you give us the data, and we scientists assume that people would understand, well, we are rational beings, right? Well, frankly, we knew climate change is happening. We knew that smoking kills, but look, we are still doing it, right? So that kind of indicates that, well, something is a disconnect. So both of us, we started talking about these things, and one thing that kind of stuck out, and which is very close to what Rafi mentioned about morality. Well, look, we believe in somebody, some being, which we haven't even seen. We have no tangible proof that God exists, other than the belief system that we have developed. So maybe we have approached the issue all wrong. Maybe it has to have a sort of a religious packaging that, and if we look back and if we look back into the scripture, if we look in the Quran, for example, we do have more than one instance where this has been brought up. I can quote many examples, for example. So we are now we had 2 workshops conducted, one in Boston, one in Oxford, where we have a range of different scholars, activists working in this field. And we were amazed because we did not know that religious communities are working. But that is in the US and the UK we are talking about, where UK is perhaps one of the least affected country going forward about climate change, but they are worried. So I'm just trying to sort of articulate the mass media is important, but frankly, and again, I have to disagree with you on that, because we have empirical evidence that suggests that this is the journalist being, the idea of being objective is what has led American public, at least, to the point where they kind of have this, backfire effect, because journalists covering the story as objective, showing both sides, where we clearly knew that the other side is wrong to begin with. But because journalists are trained to, present an opinion in an objective way, so they have to have the notion of being balanced. And that has kind of, maybe it seems so subtle, but
Do we need to
that.
bring muftis on board in Pakistan then?
No, I'm not saying faith, but why not actually? I mean, look around us. How many things we do every day, which is basically originated because of faith. You have people killing each other just because, well, my faith believes that this is doable. We are not asking people to do such extreme things. We are asking, and let me tell you another data point, for example. So we ask people, what are the different things that you are willing to do in order to, help tackle climate change? The least percentage that people said they would be willing to do was giving up meat. Giving up meat was something that people were not willing to do in order to tackle climate change. And this is one of the biggest factors that contributes to greenhouse gas emissions. I mean, we have a lot to blame. And when I'm pointing myself, then I can also point to other people. We have talked about the gap between global south and north. I have been an advocate of that. But frankly, I'm kind of pissed, if I may, by continue hammering one point. Okay, floods happened, but okay, it was a worldwide problem. We knew how it happened. But what have we done afterwards? Have we done a little bit in terms of our own capacity building where we can prevent that? They're going to happen. I go on conferences, I'd say that, look, in Pakistan, we used to have 4 seasons. We are so well equipped to predict. We have now 6 seasons. We can exactly predict when smog season begins. We can exactly predict when the flood season begins. Have we done anything yet about these things? We haven't. I mean, it's very fancy to talk about the gaps that between north and south, and I'm totally on that. I pestered them a lot actually on these things. But I think sometimes we kind of forget that there is a lot. The onus is on us as well. If we show that we are putting up the fight rather than just going on the cops and asking for more money, that's not a face you want to put up every now and then. Once it can be sold, but not every time. So just to refer back to the question, I think we should not rely on one tool. There has to be a multi-tool approach, I would say. And the message should not just come from mass media. There are other ways people engage with climate-related issues. Greta did not use media. She first decided to do something. She proved it can work. And then media was, oh, there is somebody who's called Greta. So media, then made what Greta is now. So we individually need to take action. And then we have to use multiple different tools for us that are readily available, in fact, if we know how to use them properly.
I think we'll bring this question back to Dr. Nosher, but I want to share a few things. And I think this is very interesting. Yes, we have the smog season, we have the fog season in Lahore, unfortunately, and a lot of people who probably just waiting to get married in like 3 months, I think. They're just worried about that. But I think, I don't know if any one of us is always ready to be put on the spot always. I was in London last year to run the London Marathon, and I met this climate activist group. They were British and Pakistani British. They knew some of us. They knew me because of the television. And they took photos with us. And after taking the photos, they said, it's very shameful of you to come to run this London Marathon, flying by air and, consuming thousands of liters of petrol and everything. What do you answer to them? No, there's no answer to them. And I asked them, like, what else could have been a way to get to London to run this marathon? It's like, you should have come by the ship. Don't use planes. And now the stop oil is going after the jets, right? Okay, yeah, we're running some marathons. Lahore Marathon is happening on 16th February, and Karachi Marathon on 5th January, and some other marathon in Islamabad. You're right about that. But what Dr. Waqas said, Dr. Nosher, is it necessary to take these extreme steps? Because I remember reading New York Times published a 10-pager whole detailed essay that no, you do not need to stop eating the meat, but yes, you have to reduce eating the meat. And that's directly linked to the heat levels and the climate catastrophe. But right now, Dr. Paul Saladino, Dr. Eric Berg, Dr. Uberman in the US are telling that the only way for a healthy lifestyle looking forward is meat and poultry and chicken and other stuff. And you gotta eat that, you can't take it out. Is this debate can be a part of the whole, academic process we're gathered here for?
So I think, this has been a really, really interesting discussion. I've already learned a lot about the issues, and it's made me think about it, including the question that you just asked. To me, I think there are the point that I will sort of want to focus on is a lot of the strategies that can work, whether it is incremental or whether it is more drastic, a lot of this is still open for us to do research on. And it is not the domain of a single field. We already heard about the interdisciplinary nature of what we need to do. And what I have seen work effectively in very small cases, but still effectively, is efforts that are made by individuals to create, no surprise here, create alliances, create networks in this particular area. So I've been involved through the National Science Foundation. I work very closely with an environmental scientist at Colorado, at the University of Colorado. Her name is Jillian Bowser. And so she comes from a background that is very much into science, but her big idea is we need to set up alliances. And so the National Science Foundation funds what is called as the Youth Environmental Alliance in Higher Education, with the nice acronym YEAH, Y-E-A-H. And she set up another one, which is called FLASH, which I was involved in. I was a co-principal investigator, which is Fueling Learning Alliances in Sustainability in Higher Education, F-L-A-S-H, FLASH. The point is that if we bring these communities together, the younger generation especially, to think through what these issues are, and in particular, she's been focusing on women and sustainability. It's been mentioned twice now that environmental impacts are disproportionately high on minorities, on women, on marginalized community. I was firsthand involved in an effort to help these individuals, both at COP18 in Doha, and then again in COP28 in Dubai last year. And the idea is that in both of these, we bring together networks of individuals who I was quite surprised to learn that, for example, when you have floods in places like India and other places, the people who are really hurt are all the women and the children, because all their husbands were the ones out at sea and they lost it, and they were having huge challenges in that context. So to answer this question, I think we need to we focus a lot in the field of communication on how we are talking to the public, and I think that's very important. We are in a mass communication context in this case, but the field of communication has a lot to offer in how we can mobilize and create interdisciplinary alliances and networks to understand and adjudicate the question you asked. Is it important to do to have disruptive ways of saying stop completely? Is it okay to have incremental approaches? I don't think, we can all have opinions about it, but I think what we need to do is build alliances, because one thing we get from that is when people become part of these alliances, they have a commitment to it. They know that they are in a common cause that is much larger than their own personal life or their personal issues. A lot of these alliances, I will say, also build stories. You mentioned earlier the importance of persuasion and narrative. There is an organization in the United States called the Story Collider. I don't know if any of you have heard of that. That's a fantastic example of scientists who have decided that what they want to do is use the power of story and narrative to be able to persuade people.
Interesting. Farhana Sahib, I'll come to you after Rafe. Actually, we'll take another communication question with a gap. I just want to ask quickly something from Rafe Alam, Farhana Sahib. When we talk about yes, you say it has nothing to do with certain things. So that builds a picture about only it's like pharma, industry, auto, jet fuel and the planes and everything. So you as a lawyer can define this, what Stop Oil is doing. Is it correct? Because I read an article just maybe a few months ago, and they described the actions of Stop Oil. They said again, we were there for a marathon in Berlin, and they painted what the Stop Oil does. They threw the orange paint, They threw the paint on Brandenburg Gate. So a lot of activists came up and they said, this is crazy. This is not right. And they said, later on, the Stop Oil groups went after private jets. They threw oil on them. They said, this is something you gotta do. Stop painting the Brandenburg Gate, because that probably not gonna solve the problem, not gonna get you the positive attention. When we talk about these, does it involve the groups of the public, or we just cannot blame each other actually?
Well, I mean, I'll start by saying that in the 21st century, two of the most easily identifiable icons of peace are Nelson Mandela and Mohandas Gandhi.
Yeah.
Arguable, but I'll point out that both of these individuals in their lifetime were branded as terrorists and jailed.
Right.
Gandhi spent a decade in jail, right? Just Stop Oil has its heart in the right place. We just don't see how right they are. 20 years from now, they'll be celebrated. What they're doing is not enough. Look, you can either try and raise how many billions of people at or close to the poverty line. You can try and develop the world so that they have more dignity. But I read a study somewhere that there are about 200 to 250,000 people on Earth with a personal wealth of over $20 million. And you know where they are because you know where their boats and where their planes are parked. Go for them. A couple of years ago, Mohammed bin Salman took half of his family, put them in a hotel, hung them upside down and said, give me money. And he got it. I think it is much easier. I mean, if you think about it logically, go for the rich people. Just take their money. You'll fix half the problems of the world overnight. But look, I don't mean to jest. Coming back to this point of understanding and communicating the environment, I'm deeply impacted by a book written by Amitav Ghosh a few years ago called The Great Derangement, where he talks about how if a UFO, sorry, Pranaz, I'm taking into your time here. He talks about how if, once the climate crisis wipes out civilization and a bunch of aliens come and do some vulture tourism on Earth, they'll want to do what other tourists do, check out what the theaters had, check out what we were watching and what we used to do. And if you watch television and if you read the news right now, these aliens would be forced to conclude that the human race had no idea that the climate crisis was about to hit them. Oh my God. That's the great derangement. Because somewhere along the line, we have lost the ability to connect with the environment. And there's a multiplicity of reasons for this. It could be urbanism, it could be modernity. I mean, you ask a kid nowadays where milk comes from and he'll say the fridge. This disconnect has been one of the characteristics of modernity, is according to Amitav Ghosh. Because if you go back, in some cases a few decades, in some cases a few centuries, to the stories that we used to tell each other, the stories, the discourse of humanity was deeply entwined with the environment. The poetry of Punjab, for example, on the banks of a river, a lot of the myths of European civilization based on a forest and the myths and the spirits that lived in them, we connected with the environment. And yet what's happened with modernity is that human agency and individuality is given primacy. It is the story that's told of human beings. And the environment has sort of become a backdrop upon which this primary story is told. And this is again a disconnect. It's a derangement. And I think one of the tasks of communicators is to bridge that gap between literally the soil underneath our feet and the story that we tell about ourselves. And in this connection, I'm very proud to be part of something called the Lahore Biennale Foundation, which just last month put together a 1-month show, 60 international artists from 30 different countries in about a dozen places in Lahore, talking through their art about climate and the environment. Right. I mean, these are the stories of reducing that disconnect. And I think the job of us as communicators is to recognize how closely tied we are to the environment.
Very interesting. Farana Sahib, we'll be coming to the audience shortly. We'll have the time for any questions you want to ask before we close this session and have a memorable photograph together. And I've heard there will be like environment-friendly flowers will be given to the guests here tonight. That will be interesting. Farana Sahib, which people are the most affected with the climate change and which people are the most responsible for this kind of crisis? Because why I'm asking, like, journalists do find out data, they do the investigative journalism, and I think some of the biggest scandals, the environmental or climate scandals, were uncovered by the journalists in the US. Even during the Obama's time, the Flint water issue was uncovered by a newspaper there. No administration, no other entity knew about that. So far, what's the takeout?
Thanks, Junaid. So basically, those people who are invisible, they are the ones most affected. For example, if you see across the age spectrum, we talk a lot about children, but not enough. We talk about people generally who are ending their teens and going on to 40s. After 40s or 50s, we already presume that people are dead. So old people are living in isolation. That's also true for very young people. These are people who are affected by climate change a lot. More invisible people. There has been a lot of migration. We know still that after what happened between Pakistan and now Bangladesh, so many people who came from there still do not have ID cards in Pakistan. These are invisible people. What about the homeless?
Biharis and the Bengalis, right?
Yes. What about the homeless people? Like if you drive through Karachi, under every flyover, you will see people. These are people who have either moved to Karachi to look for money, or because the climate, or they are people who were displaced in 2022, they still don't have homes. If you ask them, you'll be surprised. I was working on a piece recently for the third poll. There was absolutely no data telling us how many homeless people we have in Pakistan, leave alone in Karachi. So we can talk about women and how women are affected. We can talk about other communities, but I'll tell you there are certain communities we never talk about. How much is the transgender community affected by it? The uncomfortable conversations are the conversations we need to have. Children are being born, I'll again bring that up. Preemies, premature children, premature babies, the sizes are small, and all of this has a link with climate change. Of course, it's a buzzword. Climate change is where the funding is coming, which is why sometimes that's not a compliment for my fraternity, which is journalism. We try and add climate change even to stories which are not actually climate change stories. Yet, there are invisible communities. I think that's where we need to be looking. We are still just talking about, like somebody will call and say, let's have a write-up about औरतों के क्या दुख हैं और तकलीफें हैं climate change में. But what about others?
Of course.
Yeah.
Right.
So all of them are affected. One small thing we have been talking about, and Raf is mentioning the word communicators. I think it's also time that we rethink what communication is. We are still working in silos, and that's so yesterday. Like media, print media, broadcast media, communication practitioners. Is a communication practitioner somebody who's supposed to uplift the profile of his or her CEO as a corporate communications lead? Or is it somebody who can actually communicate to people what might harm them and how indigenous knowledge can be used for early warning systems? So we have to discuss also what media and communications is. Maybe new definitions are needed.
Right.
Thank you.
Dr. Vikas, would you like to contribute? Because we're going towards the end now.
One thing Rafi mentioned about Just Stop Oil, hurrah to them. They are fantastic. And you and I can talk about how public think about them. I just done researching about them, and that I can tell you how much people hate them. And that's sad. Regarding, I mean, I think that she mentioned about redefining communication. We talked about the morality of the thing. I personally believe if there's one thing that I want audience to take away with, I think Rafi has a very good analogy. The bomb has gone off. You choose your 5 seconds time when it's gonna hit. I have shown you the graph where if we continue with the current policies, we are still going beyond 2.5. You can, we are going in, so, okay, let me just, I get emotional because I think the problem is the more you read, the more you know which state you are in. There are 9 tipping points in climate science. And the tipping point means once the point is tipped, we can't go back, okay? And that's the last bit I'm going to say, and then the last bit that I can use to scare you off. 7 are going to tip. 8, the 8th one is going negative. And about the 9th one, we still don't have enough data to say if we are reversing it or we are moving towards. So if even one tipping point, what could be the tipping point? For example, if I mean, you guys can't think about the Arctic ice is depleting. If that happens, and it is happening, by the way, and faster than we can imagine, so that we are just a couple of years away from that coming to a point where it won't be reversed. When that happened, we have cascading events afterwards. We don't have models to predict. We have jet streams going haywire.
Oh, yes.
We don't know how El Nino and the other patterns will change. We can't have that because by the end of the day, we are humans. We can only imagine, we can only crunch the numbers we can actually produce, right? So we can make a very good predictive model based on something. We can't actually make model out of thin air.
Right.
So we are getting there. Bomb has gone off. You choose your 5 seconds. For you, it could be 10 years. And in environmental psychology, we call this psychological distance. And according to my work, 50% people that I have spoken to, they think that the climate change is going to impact them or their country in 50 odd years or more. And half of the population said that they are being affected now. So you still have, even if that is the one data point that you want to walk away with, you still have half the population to convince. And I mean, that's how I would frame it. Yes, we need to have difficult conversations. Are we ready? Nope. Do we have all the information that we need to have those? I think we are very far from that. So choose your 5 seconds, but that's the reality.
Right.
Sooner or later, you have to accept that.
It's even more scary to find out how many more new Otters Bombardiers has gotten, for the next 5 years. That's another scary data. But Madam Sylvia, is it need to be done in the classrooms, or it needs to be taken out of the classrooms now?
We by now should be taking it out of the classrooms. It's time for action. We have discussions all the time. Now it's the time to take action. And again, emphasizing the network, the need for collaboration, the need for communication within institutions itself. We have the mass communication department in FCCU.
Absolutely.
We try to give seminars discussing about the current issues that are going on. The language that we put may not be reaching the people that we want because it's not the appropriate language. So there needs to be a reach to the communication department and so forward. So we can use our expertise to be able to communicate the message that it's required in the right way to whom we want it to reach. And it's no longer we don't have time to talk anymore.
Absolutely. Rafi Saab, you and Sylvia live in Lahore. All other people gonna be exiting Lahore at some point. Is there one thing you want to say to people who are present here on this campus, in this hall, that they can do today or tomorrow or this week, which can, help?
Well, okay. When it comes to Lahore, I suffer from the same problem many Lahoris suffer from, and that is, I think, the world begins and ends in Lahore. But when you look, next time you go out, just for a second, please try and understand that every single tree that you see planted in the city of Lahore, in fact, any city, the tree, the type of tree, how far it is from the next tree, the width of the green belt, the width of the road, the color of the sidewalk, the right of way, the building, every single centimeter of what you see in a city was brought there and built there by men and women. In other words, it is political. All what you see in a city is based on decisions taken by men and women about what that city should look like. And it manifests itself differently. But my point is, a city gets what it asks for and what it deserves. And if you want more green, if you want more public transport, politics will make it happen. You just have to vision it. And that's what's so important about recognizing this in a city. Everything there is there because of a reason. If it's there for a reason, that reason can change.
Right.
And I've seen things happen dramatically. Things that you would never assume. People wear seatbelts in Lahore. Didn't happen 15 years ago. People wear helmets in Lahore, right?
Of course.
We had a horrible incident in Peshawar in 2014, and within 2 months, all 20 or so many thousands of schools in Pakistan had 14-foot walls.
Yeah.
We have a rescue service that works. When there is an attention and a demand for something, it happens.
Anything is
So
possible.
a city is its people, and don't lose your imagination.
Indeed. Thank you. Any people in the audience here want to ask a question from any panelist, please, this is your time. And please, if someone can bring the mics over, as I requested, Saqib Saab, do you need the mic from, that's great. These are the people helping anyway for this cause. I think okay, someone there, but there as well. Yeah, of course, go ahead, maybe we can hear you.
The first one was about the entertainment part of things, right? And I'll take it back a little bit because I think some of us would remember that the villains for Batman were Poison Ivy and Mr. Freeze. And they wanted us to support the trust fund baby. So I think that in terms of entertainment, we don't really have supportive narratives as far as climate is concerned. And my main question, and this is something very personal for me, and I've been having this conversation with my other colleagues as well, is that I'm from the global south, right? I am a victim of the climate crisis. My contribution, frankly, is probably negligible in comparison to the true polluters globally. So I have a sense of fatalism or nihilism or whatever you want to call it, a negative sense that whatever I might do, it is not going to change anything. I cannot protect my climate because I have not done the damage. So how do you fix this mindset? I mean, I get where, you're doing it for the next generation, but even if I do anything and we as 20 crore people do anything, we're not going to reverse the damage. We're not going to stop the damage. So then what's the point?
Right.
I'd like to hear about that.
Climate change is everything change. You have to understand this. Nothing is going to be the same. And what you're suffering from, you call it nihilism. Some people call it collapse aware. But I think going forward, as civilization as we know it changes or collapses, and the systems that we've put in to support that civilization collapse before our eyes, systems like democracy no longer hold sway. We have a handful of people who have governed countries for now over 20 years. Come on, there's no democracy. Systems and institutions like judiciaries, like state banks, no longer supporting the principles and ideals of the civilization they're meant to. What we need going forward in this time of uncertainty, again, just is to remember the most important thing is life, not only of our own and other humans, but of birds and of flora and fauna and animals. And in order to really appreciate the life and dignity is to have empathy. So in a collapsing civilization, what you need, I mean, yeah, in Pakistan, there's not much you're going to be able to do about it, but you can still have empathy. And I think that's a strength that will help connect human beings in an uncertain future.
I think I'll just piggyback what Rafi said. I think this is this sort of a wrong assumption that I agree with your point that this is not my problem because I was not the one who caused it. Well, that's true. It has become your problem, but not by your making. I agree to that, but now you have to make a choice. Do you want to live as a victim and just let it, perpetuate it again and again in your mind, just because I am the victim, I'm not gonna do it? I think this is sort of a wrong approach in a sense that there are two things that science communicators have done wrong, and I take the blame. One, making this idea ingrained among public that, look, climate change is happening, it's gonna happen to your grandchildren and to the next children. No, it should have always been an immediate thing. Yes, we should do now. That's the one thing. So what you are saying that the fatalism and whatever that you mentioned about the climate anxiety, this is what I call it, about the children, and she also mentioned that. you're also suffering. Why are you leaving it or trying to care about this issue just because you think about your kid and next generation? That's not the case. Okay. And the idea that whatever you do will not make any dent, I frankly, we are at a point where every last bit of drop counts. I know this seems like a very defeatist approach. I accept it. But I don't want you to walk away from this room by thinking, well, they have been talking about climate change. There's nothing I can do. I'll just go back and just, instead of if I have a choice between EV and a diesel, I'll go with the diesel because mere diesel lene se farak to padna nahi hai. I don't want you to go on and take that decision because that's a bad decision for climate, for yourself, and for the greater good.
Right.
Your good decisions still matter regardless how insignificant they seem to you. That's probably the way I would answer that.
I think the thing you said, I haven't done it, but it's my problem. This is Pakistan's play at UN. This is Pakistan's play at the COP conferences, that we have not contributed to this whole shit, but we are suffering, you know. So this is something like that. We'll take one more question, but Dr. Nosher wants to add something, and then Farasab as well. We'll take the question first. Sir, please go on.
Agreeing with Dr. Wakas, why we go for certain solutions which are at the macro level, why not we may go for the micro level? For example, I do agree with him regarding the religious packaging in Pakistan. When there is a lot of following of religious scholars, based on what we take a lot of decisions, why can't we use that platform? Number one. Number two, I have been a part of a marketing team of Safeguard when it was launched. So the project was launched in schools, and we focused on the students from class 1
Commander
to 5.
Safeguard.
Yeah, I was part of that campaign. Would you believe that the parents used to say that when they entered into the malls, the first choice of kids was that of Safeguard soap?
I
You
liked
were
him.
mentioning about quitting of the cigarette. When some daughters say that you have to quit, people start quitting that. So why not we may go for this type of small scale grassroots level projects? And commenting on a final question.
This can be the outcome, Professor Saf. Yes.
Yeah, should we take it from outside from the class to the field? Ultimately, responsibility perhaps lies on more of us as an academic community. We have a lot of students available with us. Why not we train them, we sensitize them, and they are the ambassadors to a lot of families and villages where they
Basically, हमें communications में ये देखना है that who is our audience and who do they listen to? And how do we get them to understand this? So I might write a lot in English language papers, but we are preaching to the already converted. What about, so if it be through sermons and mosques, that's excellent. What's the problem with that? Why do we have to be judgmental and snobbish about it? What about the biggest means? So Junaid is in the broadcast industry. What is watched the most in Pakistan? Dramas. Why aren't organizations like Kash Foundation and others creating stories about how women or lives of everyday people get affected by climate change? Dramatize it. Make it into stories. Get it across to people. Jis tarah se bhi ho, get the message across. That's all I have to say.
Dr. Nosher.
That's interesting. You reminded me from that last comment about several decades ago when we had a population issue, still do, but had a larger population issue, overpopulation issue in India. And there was a lot of efforts by communication scholars to create what is called as pro-social soap operas. And the idea was the same thing, to be able to succeed. And in fact, I was mentioning earlier, Everett Rogers, Arvind Singhal, who was one of his students, they did a lot of work on being able to do both formative and summative evaluation of pro-social soap operas on television in India, on Mexico, etc. The point I was going to make is in response to some of this nihilism or collapse that was being described. And I'm going to throw something that is literally out of this world that we haven't talked about. And that is space travel. It turns out that, not that we talked about it today, but a lot of the work...
Enter Elon Musk.
Yes, indeed. And a lot of the work that, so a lot of the research that I've been doing for the last 2 decades is funded by NASA, and it looks at preparing us for space travel to the Artemis mission, going to the moon, and then on to Mars. Relevant to the particular issue we are talking about right now, it turns out that there are 2 very distinct climate motivators for why we should go to Mars. One of them is Elon. The other, I'm going to say, is Jeff Bezos, who formerly Amazon and Blue Origins. And so SpaceX and Blue Origins. If you go back and look at the history of why they were created, one of them said, we are running out of resources on this earth. And so we're going to go into space so that we can do space mining, that we can be able to get more resources. And so we will be able to continue to live well on this earth. A second opinion is we're going into space because when this earth collapses, we need to find a new home for ourselves.
Interesting.
I'll let you decide which of these groups was saying which argument. But
By the next conference, probably Dr. Nosher will be on the Mars or something. So get everything out of him right now.
It was talking about global media coverage of climate change and the climate crisis. So what it established was that there are two phases of misinformation and disinformation that are currently going on. One phase is the negative one, which we all know that climate crisis does not exist and it's not even that big of a deal. The other one is the over-exaggeration of the issue. So my question is for the latter form of misinformation, that is it morally acceptable to support and indulge in this form of misinformation, which is exaggerating an issue, which is actually going to have a better reaction for the audience, like it will be for the greater good. I read that some articles are writing if something is projected to happen 100 years from now because of the climate crisis, they are saying that it's happening now. They're saying that it's going to happen in 10 years.
It was just, I think I can touch both questions, previous
please.
questions, that when you say that why should you care, that was the point that I raised before, that we actually have to find to whom are we talking and what they care for, what touched them, what makes them care so they will work. And when we talk about climate change, it's not an environmental problem anymore. This is a social problem. It's a survival problem at this point. So what do you care for? And this is why it's important that to whom are we talking? And it's no longer the big buzzwords that people may be confusing for the majority, but it's what do you care for and how can we make the message answer that you care for this. It's the ones you love, for example, that will suffer. So you should care. Even if you are not able to see the complete solution turning, you know that someone else will. And they will still have a planet that no need to go to Mars. They will still have a planet to continue. And just a small story. Two of my twin cousins, they went to school when the second grade. And at home, no waste segregation, nothing. They went to school and they learned in school at that age, first, second grade school, how to segregate waste. They came home and they told their parents, you're doing it wrong. This is not the right way to do it. And they are my uncles, my uncle and my aunt, and they changed their behavior at home because the children came and they told them this is the right behavior. So if children are going, if we have programs different at micro level that make people change their behavior, this is the way to do it. We may not be able to finish world hunger, but we may be able to work in different points. And again, it's the role models. So it may not be just a solution of me stop using a car or not traveling so much or using public transportation, but I have to ensure that I am doing my part and ensure that maybe have a ripple effect and people will follow. So I think, thank you.
The question that he mentioned about mis and disinformation, first a disclaimer, I don't believe misinformation is a problem. I come from that kind of a background and I am one of the few who can say that, and I'll basically be crucified because of saying that, because this earns a lot of money in a lot of different places. But I think misinformation isn't a problem. People is the problem. We can talk about that, how I come to that conclusion. Regarding the hyping, is that overhyping in a way Is it something that comes as a miscommunication, misinformation? Well, as Rafi mentioned, and I have sort of piggybacked again, there is no hyping here. We are not hyping. These are happening. You can't see it. I think you need to look a better source which can confirm. If you are observant enough, you could see it. Number one. Number two, I think we should stop pushing this narrative that there is a certain interest group. Yeah, it was many years ago that there were interest groups who were pushing certain narrative fossil fuel industry. We have books by Merchant of Doubts, for example. They talk about how media pushes that kind of narrative. This is not happening now. We are living in a real world. It's a real problem. It's an existential problem. And we can't exaggerate enough if that's what, if that makes the ball moving, I'm happy to over-exaggerate it.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Aap sabka bahut bahut shukriya. We'll just close the discussion here, and I'll request Professor Dr. Salim Abbas, Dr. Firas Ajami to come to the stage. We can present some flowers to the guest, and then we can have a group photograph.